Hi, everyone. Okay, today we are going to kind of get more into the code of this web app. So, real quick, up here in the Git changes, you can configure and set user information here with your user and email, and that should resolve any Git issues in the future. So, let's take a look at the Solution Explorer real quick. So, we created these four projects. FLP and FLP.client were automatically created, and then we added FLP.data and FLP.shared. So today we're going to kind of structure these projects out and kind of go over a little bit of what they're supposed to do while we kind of get prepped for our initial test of how we're going to build this web application. So right now, if you go to let's start with the server here. So if you open components, this is a classic Blazor setup here where you have components, and Blazor is all about components. So all these .razor files. So in this case, these are pages here. These .razor files are pages. Here's an error page and a home page. And you'll see in, I believe it is the app.razor here, you see that the base reference is slash, which is usually your index page. And if we go look at a page home, you'll see that page is referenced here. So it's kind of how the app knows how to route around. And this is kind of how we tell Blazor to do some things. You see that these are kind of highlighted in green. These are custom to these are custom, not HTML generated, but these are custom components here. You see routes, flp.components.routes. If you go look at flp.components, and then you'll find routes right here. So that's just telling the application that, hey, you're going to include this. I'm not going to go too much into this today. Just know that this exists, and we actually do need to make a change to this as well. So you saw in our previous episode how we said we're going to do our render activity or interact activity as both server side and WASM, depending. So we need to set that here in the head outlet. We're going to set the render mode here. So we're going to say, hey, you're actually going to do interactive auto. So what this will allow is to say, hey, your render mode for this specific component is we're going to make sure that you can pass the render activities both between the server and the client. And you'll see more as we go through, but this is important to add this here. Interactive. As you can see, interactive, there's a couple of settings: interactive server or WebAssembly or auto. So auto will determine when Blazor hands it off from the server to the client. And again, we'll go through that. For now, let's actually do the okay. So let's keep that as is there. So as you can see, it's a little different with the .razor files app route. We actually need to move some of this stuff. So this is on the server side, but we need to add some things into the client side because most of our handling of components is going to happen in the client side. So let's go take a look at some of this stuff. So we're going to add another one similar to this, and we're going to add a folder called pages because we want the client to be able to have an interactive home page. We're going to cut this and put this here. The server can own the error page for now because I don't think we will have any kind of interactivity with that error page that needs to be passed to the client, and the client needs to mess around with it at this point in time. So we're going to pass this home page over. We're also going to pass the layout, and the layout includes main layout, and this is how the app knows how to build basically every page. So if we were to add components, let's say like a navigation component, and we wanted a navigation component on every single page, and what I mean by pages is this. So if you look at the main layout, we have app body, and that app body is the page basically. So if we were to add like a nav menu, we, instead of having to add it to every single page, we could include it in the main layout here. So this is the new style. This is kind of React, Angular. We're building out a website by using structured components. So we're building the components, and then we can dynamically add them or remove them in certain places. And we'll go into that a little bit more. So we're going to cut this, and we're going to have that under the client so that we can mess around with it a bit more interactively in the client. And then we're going to move routes over as well. Going to move routes over. And it's going to break because we need to tell it you're now here. And again, we're moving some of this stuff over because of the way we are. If we were doing server-side rendering, we wouldn't move anything over. But because we're doing auto, we're having it dynamically set information on the server and then pass it over to the client. We're going to have to move some things around so that that interoperability works. Okay. So I believe that is everything we need to move over. And if you look at the underscore imports, this is just how we can tell our app, hey, you're going to use all this on over here. And then we have a separate imports over here. So it's very important to note that certain projects should only have visibility in certain areas. So the server is going to have visibility on everything. The client is only going to have visibility to shared, and these are used classes. So these are just being used. So these are the two important libraries, the FLP and FLP.client. Okay. So now let's get into it a little bit more. So we've moved that around. We have our pages over. Let's do a build just to make sure that we're doing things right. And we always want to run build. After every little thing you do, you want to run build so that you can test to see what you just did, if it failed or whatever. So we have succeeded, and let's try and run it. So we did some pretty hefty moving though. Moved from a whole different project, and we want to make sure that that's still working. And we added that interactive auto render mode. Sweet. Okay, so hello world. So you won't notice it now, but some things are happening in behind the scenes here, where the server handles the page first. It says, okay, do I have anything to load onto the page? And what will happen is it will load data to the page from the server. The server will send the client, hey, this is what you get. And then the client, it will then hand it off to the client after it's done that render. And then the client will take it, and then it will re-render that page underneath the client with that same information. So this is where, let's say you need to offload a lot of loading of things. So the server can handle just initially showing information on the page. And then the client can then load, specific things to the logged in user after that. So that's why we're going to want to use that interoperability in this case, just to show the vast capabilities that Blazor has. Okay. So now we've kind of figured out the structure here. Before we go in and do anything crazy, let's finish building out a template for how pretty much any web app is going to work. So we have these two kind of figured out now. So let's do flp.data. And what we're going to do here, let's remove this class. What we're going to add to this class. So this is going to be, we're going to be using Entity Framework Core. Okay, so this is Entity Framework Core and Microsoft SQL Server. So that is going to be, we're going to be really focused heavily on Microsoft things. So Entity Framework Core works very well with MSSQL. So you will see like a lot of tools that we can use that, you know, Entity Framework Core covers up a lot of this migration stuff that we need to do, this building new objects, getting them onto the database. So this just helps developers build out their data sets really, really fast and just keep working at a high velocity. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up how we are going to structure data access and data management and things like that. So for the .data, we're going to add a folder called entities. And I'll include this code in a GitHub repo so you can pull this down and just copy and paste it over. But this is just an explanation, a very in-depth explanation of what we need to do. So we're going to have an entity here. And we're just gonna add one just so you can see what this looks like. And we're gonna have application user. And this is gonna be a class. And basically we're gonna say, hey, this exists. This entity exists in a database somewhere. And this we're gonna actually have it inherit from the identity user. If we right click on that, we're going to see that there is a package we can install with this. So real quick, application user, we're going to create an entity called application user that's going to inherit from identity user. And identity user is an ASP.NET Core. It exists in the case that, you know, how we skipped over our add individual accounts when we first created this. We're going to go over it more manually and really show what it's doing and why it's doing what it is doing. But this identity user is saying, hey, this user exists with username, password, you know, is the email confirmed and things like that. So Entity Framework Core helps us build out a lot of these entities that we need to use, their rights that they might need. But yeah, we're going to get Microsoft ASP.NET Identity and .entity framework, and we're going to install latest here. Okay, so we're going to leave that as is for now. We'll go back to it. But just know that this will exist in a database somewhere that we create. We're going to be able to create that. Next, we want to create our new class. And we're going to call this the application DB context. So we need an application DB context. And this is going to tell the program.cs in the server how to get to our database and what is available in our database. So to create that, we have to include a few things here. So I'm actually going to grab, we're going to pass DB context options application DB context. And we're going to hopefully be able to right click and include. Awesome. Great. We want this. Find install latest. So this is nice because as we're building this out, you can hopefully follow along and grab some of these things that we're going to need. So we're going to need to pass these DB context options in. And this is going to inherit from entity DB context. So it's going to build it off the identity DB context for application user. So pass those options over. So if we right click here, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And a lot of things just flash there, so and I'm going to pause there to make sure that I didn't do something wrong. Okay, I think I found a solution to that. So if you see here, we want this ASP.NET Core 1. If we try and install it from here, there's a failure. Package restore failed, rolling back package. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to the tool. Instead of using that control dot or the right click, we're going to go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and then Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. We're going to go to Browse, and we're going to go to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity Framework Core. We want this one, and we're in the Data project right now. And if you check this right now, we'll see that, hey, you can't install it. You got errors in your code. So if we go back and we look here, it doesn't like this right now. So we're going to comment that out. We're going to go back here and we're going to install again. And we're going to try that again. And now we see the real problem. We've been when I do that right click and download, it finds the latest version. And currently it's on 9. So we're on, as of now, 2/19/2025. We are in the middle of .NET 8 and .NET 9 just, I think, became, it came out of early access and is now officially supported. So what we have to do is we have to go through, and this is why I recommend getting the code and then just following through the code in this video so that you can see the errors that you will probably experience as you get into a career as a computer scientist, software engineer. You'll run into just minor things like this. So we're going to look at our installed, and everywhere I see a 9.0, we're going to install the latest 8.0. We'll install that. Apply. Okay. We'll go here. And the reason we're using .NET 8 is because Microsoft has a support policy for .NET versions where the odd numbers, so .NET 9, are short-term support, and even numbers are long-term support. So in this case, I'll hopefully throw a demonstration of that in editing right now, but you can see that .NET 9 short-term support and .NET 8 long-term. So you want to, if you're supporting an application, you want to have it probably on an even number. And if you're developing something quickly and want to use the latest and greatest and hopefully are going to go to, .NET 10 in this case, then use .NET 9. And again, you can always use the latest. You just have to be prepared for it to go out of support. So we're going to make sure we eradicate any 9 dot from our Microsoft packages here. WebAssembly pack. Ooh, that's not good. That's a top level. All right. We're going to make sure that we're great. Let's look at the top level for SDK. We shouldn't be using .NET 9. Hopefully that will be fine. Okay. So now let's try and re-download that. Core. And we want to go to data. We're going to make sure we're on 8. Okay, looks like it installed and without any kind of screaming, so that's good. And you got to celebrate the small wins. In this case, it's just making sure your package got installed correctly. That is always, those small wins all lead up to a big win. So, okay. So now we have this here. So now we want to say, okay, this application DB context, we want to include the fact that we have public DB set. We have a DB set of application user, and that is going to be called application user. So that table is going to be called application users set. So what this allows it to do is we're creating this application DB context for our app to know that, hey, we have a bunch of DB sets that can be referenced. In this case, they're public, so they're visible. And these are also gettable and settable. And I will show that here very soon. So we're going to add another. So we have this kind of template going on for application DB context. So what does that mean and why is that important? So let's go to the program.cs real quick. So in the program.cs, we want to add a DB context. So we're going to grab a snippet of code. And this is very common. This is very common to have in you'll find this in most any kind of application, especially for an ASP.NET web application. You'll see something like this. So you'll have your builder here, and then we'll have a line that looks like, I'm going to have to paste from the clipboard here. So add DB context, and hopefully that all came over nice and smooth. Okay. So right click, and that's not going to give us anything. So what we got to do is got to figure out what does it want to see. First of all, we need to make sure that there is a link between, so this application DB context, we created it down here, but this is a project, a separate project from this one. So in the server, we're going to right click and we're going to add a project reference. And we're going to include .data. And while we're at it, let's do .shared too, because it should be able to see everything. It should have a reference to everything. So we'll hit OK there. And then hopefully when we go back here, awesome. Okay, so it's seeing those transitive packages now that we just installed. So now we're going to say, hey, I have an application DB context. And it still doesn't want to recognize that as existing. So we're going to application DB. Sometimes if you type it back out, again, the app will want to pick it back up. In this case, we're going to say explicit using flp.data. There we go. Inaccessible due to its so inability. I think I know what that means. It's because we don't have public in front of this. So if we go take a look now in our application DB context, we should have public class. It's less accessible. Now we have a whole bunch of issues now. So if we go look at application users, so there's some kind of train of, hey, we have less accessibility here. I'm thinking it is our application user, and if you look, we don't have public here as well. So it's important to specify how visible your classes are to other things. So if you look here now, all right, so that's cleared up. So private, public, those are some fundamental software, just kind of computer programming things where you'll really learn, public, friend, private, protected, and we'll go into that a little bit more, but I won't go into some of the basics for now. So go back to the program.cs. All right. So now we have this. So we're saying, okay, we're going to add DB context, and we have these options builder configuration. We're going to set those builder configuration to use SQL Server. We need to make sure that it is using SQL Server. And this is where you can say, let's say you're using MySQL, you can also find a way around that as well. But for now, we're going to try and use SQL Server here. So we need a specific package to include. And in this case, I believe that we will be going back to the NuGet solution, and we're going to go and find what we're looking for in browse here. So we're going to find, let's do Microsoft entity framework for, and this is why I like when the right click find auto find works, because then you don't have to mess around with this. Okay, so we found it. Microsoft.entity framework core.SQL server. And now we want this, it's not in the .data, we're now in the server project. So let's install and make sure we're on the correct .NET version. Install here. Apply, accept. And hopefully these errors don't stop it from, okay, sweet, awesome. So now if we go back to program, right click, we're going to, I believe, include that using, let's clean up this and make this go down here. I like to keep the using statements organized as much as possible, but in this case, we need to add a using Microsoft.entity framework core. Okay. And now this should be working now. Now we have a DB connection builder. So we do need to pass a connection string though as well. So we're going to create a, let's get rid of this for now. We're going to have a connection string. So what we're going to do is we're going to just set this here above. Our connection string builder.configuration.get connection string. And we're going to get the default connection. And so what this is doing is it is going to grab the app settings. It's going to look for the app settings. So builder.configuration is going to look at your available configuration. In this case, if you look at app settings here, this is how we're going to tell the application to run on kind of different environments. So you see how app settings.json, this is the default. So these are all defaults here. So whatever we don't explicitly say in these app settings.development. So this is for the development environment. Whatever we don't explicitly say here, it's going to pick it up here. So anything we don't say, so allowed hosts, so the app settings.development.json is overriding all of this. However, allowed host is here as allowed host star. It's going to take the star. So your application is going to take everything, as long as it's running under this environment, development, it's going to take all of this plus whatever isn't explicitly set here. So if we go to the program.cs, it's saying, okay, so for whatever configuration I'm running, I'm going to get that connection string under default connection. So right now, we don't have a default or connection string in the JSON at all here under our app settings. So we need to go and add that. And to add that, we're going to, we're going to go up here and we're going to set connection strings. We're going to break that out and we're going to do default connection. So we're going to just have a default connection for now. And we are going to use, so in the first episode, we kind of went over what we're going to need in this IDE, this development, our local environment. And one of those was to use data management. And that installed something, I believe, called SQL Express. What we're going to do is we are going to be able to grab a connection string that will create our connection. And let me just get a reference of this so I'm not leading you guys down the wrong path here. Okay. So we're going to have server equals local DB SQL local DB. So we're saying, hey, check this server. And we're going to say, and look at this database, which is going to be FLP. We're just going to call it FLP. We're going to say trusted connection equals true. And make sure we can have, and I don't know if this is necessarily needed, but we can do result sets equal true. Okay. So that's our default connection string here. So we're saying, hey, in the program.cs, we're saying, hey, I want to grab that default connection. So it's saying under get connection string, we're looking for connection strings, as you can see, connection strings, and then sub that name. And that name is the default connection. So we're just going to make sure these match for sure. Like you want to make sure, because sometimes that will get you and you'll be like, hey, my database isn't working. In fact, you just misspelled something. So just always think Occam's razor in this case, where the probable cause or the best way to find the solution to the problem is to start at the simplest solution, which in this case could be, errors in spelling. So we have that connection string being set, and then we are going to grab this connection string and we're going to say, hey, use SQL Server, and we're going to pass it that connection string. Okay, so now we've done a couple of things. We've kind of gone over a little bit how we have an application DB context. We want to add that DB context, and we are going to now, how are we going to access data once we have it? So we've told the application about our database. We're saying, hey, this is how you connect to it, and this is what you are expecting in this database. How are we going to write to information and get information back out of it? So we need to go look at data right now. Go back to the flp.data, and we're going to look at adding another class here, which is going to be something that you can find under Microsoft documentation. This is very common. I've seen this almost everywhere I've worked, which is a class called generic repository. Generic repository. We're going to add that here. And that generic repository, actually, I'm going to look this up in here, and I'll provide this also as as a link in the video. So generic repository pattern. So if you just Google that, there should be a Microsoft Learn. I'll provide this though too. So repository and unit of work, right? So we have a repository that we're going to want to use. So we want to find a way to basically say, hey, I want to access data, and I want to access this in a structured way, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing or whatever. I know that I'm going to need create, remove, update, or update, delete, and I can't remember the other. But we have insert, delete, update. Get, insert, delete, update. So we want these. So we're going to take this, and we're going to copy this, and we're going to put this into our own use. And we're going to make sure we actually only copy from here down, because we want to keep our namespace. So we copy this here. We now have a generic repository, the entity. So you see here, we're going to abstract this out a little bit more though too. So it wants to already have a context, school context, and this is from this demo as well. So we need to take a look at removing these real quick, and give me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So we're going to go back here, and we're going to make sure we remove some of these references that are breaking currently, because we're going to abstract these out as well. So we don't have a school context. We have an application DB context. So in this case, if you had multiple data sets you were trying to pull from, you would include them here. So if you had, let's say, instead of application DB context, you needed to speak to 2 different databases individually. This can happen sometimes, although it is nice when one application owns one database, a 1-to-1 ratio between application and one database, and then you can have another one hit an API endpoint, and that's how you handle another database. But in this case, it is possible, and there are multiple ways of doing it. Okay, so we're going to, we don't have school context, we have our application DB context, and we have our database DB set. So you're going to see me doing some things where I like the way that underscore is. Underscore is another, it's a way of saying, hey, this is, I own this. It's kind of an, I believe, an old school kind of coding practice design. This is mine, I own this, I have this, instead of saying this dot. So again, these are more fundamentals. This is the way that I do it, so feel free to, make it your own thing, as long as you have some kind of standard you're following and not just throwing, caution to the wind and naming variables crazy things or things that don't make sense only to you. You got to remember that visibility to others is going to be huge. So always remember, when you're coding something, you're leaving behind a paper trail. Every comment you make, every variable you write is leaving behind a paper trail of something. And again, don't believe comments ever. Believe the code, believe what the computer is trying to run. What is trying to run in code. All right. So we've got this set up. This is, as you can see, we're using template here, where we are saying, hey, whatever I'm passing here, we're going to say it's a class here, and we're creating a DB set of this entity. So now we need to give this some substance. So we got to say, okay, so we have a generic repository that is going to be implemented somewhere, but we have to now tell the application to use that. So we want to create another file, another class here, new item, and it's a .cs. So we're going to call it unit of work. And this is also a very common, these are all very common ways of doing things, especially with Entity Framework Core. So there should be plenty of documentation. I'll include what I'm looking at, but this seems to be a good one here, where we go look for unit of work class here. This is going to give us an overview of what we need to do. And we're going to copy again this. We want this. And you're getting insight into how pretty much everything is built, which is we're looking at documentation, and if somebody does it the right way and we like the way they do it, then we're going to take it and we're going to use it. So we're going to, we are going to change this to application DB context. We're going to rename this to underscore context, because that context is, we're referencing that everywhere, and you'll see what I mean here. By the way, I like to name things. So we are going to do new. This is a context, but we're going to do this a little differently, where we're not creating a new context. We're passing it in here, and we're going to have our generic repositories just a little bit farther down. So when we get unit of work, when we say, hey, we're constructing a new unit of work, we're going to have an application DB context pass. So we're going to dependency inject here. So if you hear dependency injection, this is what it means, is we're going to say, hey, unit of work is going to be using this application DB context that we just specified in the program.cs. So hopefully that will be passed here, and that context can then be passed to unit of work. And that is why I name it, underscore, saying this is for this class, and we're passing in context from somewhere else. So this is some other person's context. I say person. This is some other process, services, application DB context. Okay. So we have that here. All right. So now for referencing our public generic repository. Now we get to say, hey, we have application user. Check that out. We have one of those, and this is mine. This is my generic repository of application user. This is then going to say, hey, all right, I want to tell everyone that I have, when you're calling unit of work, I have an internal application user. Now we're going to specify how to build that within unit of work. So this is how we actually structure, hey, we have public repository, and we're going to say we have the application user. So we have a generic repository or application user, and this is going to be called no underscore. This is going to be called just application user without an underscore. And we're going to say every time you try and call this, you're going to get, so we're going to say every time you try and get it, if what I have equals null. So if what I actually, if I have a DB set of application user or generic repository application user and it's nothing, we're going to try and create it. So this is just making sure that we have some handling around this. So we don't want to reference a null. So we're going to pass it the context here. So in this case, if you go back to the generic repository, we're passing it that context here. So this is what's going to help set up that DB set. So we're going to pass it that context, and we're going to then, after, we're just going to return our thing. So in this case, this can run if it's null. If not, it's just going to return what we have. So now we have this generic repository implemented now. So we have this application user. That's all we have for the moment. We are doing a save here. So what save does, we have to call a save whenever we're doing any database. I believe if we're making any changes to the database, it won't save until we say, all right, context save, whatever our application context is, we're going to save that. And then we have dispose. And dispose, what disposable does is it's saying this is the life cycle of the unit of work. So you'll see us working with services and why they're scoped and where they're going to be scoped. And services can be scoped because you don't necessarily want unit of work surviving after it's useful for. So like if I need to do an insert, I want to open it and close it and get rid of it as soon as I'm finished with what I'm doing. I don't want to lock up my database. I don't want to do anything that like where I'm stopping other parts of my application from reading or anything like that. So when you really see large scale applications, database usage becomes an issue with efficiency, where you can have DB lockups and things like that, where you need to find efficiencies or deficiencies of your application and make sure that you're not doing certain things. If you ever heard of database admins, this is a lot of what they're concerned about. You as a software engineer should also be concerned about this as well, but we'll go into that more and kind of show you what that means and what that looks like. But for now, I believe we have our unit of work created, and we're going to make sure we save. Our build looks to be failing for some reason, so we're going to run that. Oh, our flp.dll. Okay, so this is something that we have .NET to install these workloads, .NET workload restore. So I believe we might not have .NET 8 SDK or whatever it's looking for here, and it's breaking all of a sudden. So what we're going to do is there's a couple tricks that I know to quickly go over some quick fixes for certain things. So if we have a DLL that can't be found, that's not good. It should be able to find our .data DLL. So we're going to close down Visual Studio. You can open File Explorer. And then you're going to go and find on this PC, C drive, users. If you go to your user, and if you go to source, and you go to repos, this is the default. And if you go under your FLP, so this is where we're at right now. Go to view, and we're going to show hidden items. You'll see this .vs. We're going to delete that. Don't delete .git, but delete .vs. And that is saving all your kind of like, it's a save state for some things like preferences and other things in your Visual Studio. But it can also help clear any clogs for the solution. I don't know why sometimes Visual Studio does this stuff, but if you're really bashing against things and doing a lot of things that aren't necessarily just code, but you're doing NuGet packages and things like that, you can start clogging up the solution. So this can be a good fix for that. So we're going to try a build now. And there's a failure. All right. So that did not fix it, but we are going to stop here and I will take a look at fixing that. Okay. So I believe the fix for this will be, we're going to go to tools. We're going to NuGet package manager. We're going to do a package manager console. So we're going to do, we're going to look at the output, the error, I mean, and we're going to look at, to install these workloads, run the following command, .NET workload restore. We'll see. .NET workload restore. And it definitely depends on what your project is. Okay. I don't know if I like the 9.0 in this, but we'll see if it works. All right, net 8 looks good. That looks good. Again, knowing what to look for is probably 80% of the battle. Knowing what you need to do and what solutions you need to solve and the right way to do them is going to get you leagues ahead of either where you used to be in your career or where or others in the sphere as well. You want to be able to know where to look, how to implement things, what is not good to implement, what is good to implement. Like if you have a workaround, that can be good to just keep working for the time being, but you want to be able to solve something and know how it's solved and why it's solved. So in this case, if our output is saying, if our error is saying, hey, to build this project, the following workloads must be installed. If your debugger is your best friend, this is just your best friend to be able to fix anything. All right, so let's clean up our solution real quick. And let's build. And as you can see, we failed because I failed to see that it's under flp.data. And I am not quite sure why we need WASM under WASM tools -net 8. So let's go look real quick. Do we need you? Okay. So as you can see, I thought I had a workaround for it, but in fact, in reality, I didn't need that. And I downloaded this WebAssembly stuff for probably absolutely no reason. But that is the fun of it. So in this case, if we go back here, I believe we just reinstalled for FLP the WASM tools it probably already had. So we are good to go there. We're going to make sure that build works again because I have a little OCD with checking that. I was told once, always build. Always build, even if you're not sure, just always rebuild, or not a rebuild, but just always try a build, maybe even a rebuild. Before you try and run, before you try and do anything. Okay, so now that data is kind of fixed up here, I believe we have all the required files we need in .data for the time being. So now we want to look at flp.shared. What we're going to do with the flp.shared is we're going to add something here, and this is going to be a folder called models. And then we're going to right click again, and we're going to add a new item. And this is going to be so shared is going to be shared between the server and the client. So FLP and FLP.client. And we want to do application user DTO. And in this case, this is a safe object that we are going to be able to pass to the client or the client to pass to the server. So we want to make sure that we can pass something safely. In this case, it's going to be the application user. So let's say we have like a password that we want to, let's say we want the name of one of our applications user. We want the first and last name. Well, we don't really want to pass around sensitive data to the client front end. So we want to have like an intermediary where we clean up this class a little bit, and we have an application user. So just know that for these entities in the data, we need to have a clean version, kind of a clean wash version of it that's okay to send to the client. So we're gonna just put this here for now, and that is just kind of a demonstration on why we need that and what we need to do with that. So right now we have unit of work created. We have generic repository, application DB context. We've created that application DB context. We have application users there. If we go look at our program.cs on the server, we have the add DB context. However, when I was talking about the scoped, how we have services, unit of work is a service, and it needs to be scoped correctly. So in this case, we're going to take unit of work, and we are going to add it as a service as well. So we have a DB context service, add DB context service. Then we're going to also have services dot add. So there's some to mention here. So we have add singleton, which a singleton is, hey, I have a service that is scoped for it. I only have one, and it exists for the entire lifetime of, in this case, on the server, it exists for forever. Then we have add transient, and I believe transient can exist across, I'm not quite certain right now, but I will include the documentation. But we want add scoped, and what scope does, it will scope it to a specific, I believe, once it's finished its job, then it will dispose of itself. So that is where we're going to have unit of work be added. So we're going to have scoped unit of work. So we're saying, hey, whenever you see unit of work, it is a scoped service, and when you create it, it has a lifetime of this kind of length and within this type. So we're going to leave that there. We're going to make sure we can build that. And we're in the server right now. And let us try and so we build now. We haven't made any changes to the front end at all. However, in the back end, we've created a reference to a database. So we should have some kind of database working right now. However, it doesn't exist for the time being. So what we're going to do is we are going to, I'm just going to make sure this runs. Cool, it runs, great, and goodbye. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that we can create this database that we've been talking about. So if you go to view, you'll see that there's a SQL Server Object Explorer here. So this is where we're going to be able to add some of our SQL servers, right? So as you can see right now, we have one. And this is so this is our, if you remember in our app settings, .development. In our default connection, we have local DB, MSSQL, local database. So this database doesn't exist yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, let's create this database. And this is using, I believe, a tool we do not have installed right now. So we're going to go flp.data, and we're going to call update database. And I don't know if we have that. Okay, great. So we don't have that installed. So what we need to do is, I believe if we go to our tools, NuGet Package Manager, manage NuGet packages, I believe we are going to be finding Microsoft.entity framework core dot tools. I believe this is what we're looking for, and we're going to want this in the data. And let me just verify this on a separate project that is working alongside this, and I will get back to you. Okay, so I believe this is the correct one. We are going to make sure that we have it installed. We're going to just install that here under the server, and we're going to make sure we're on 8. Install that. And what that will do is this will let us run Entity Framework Core Tools from the NuGet Package Manager console in Visual Studio. So I believe we also need to do one more thing before we just update the database. So that's there. We're going to go back to our package manager. And if we look at this, we call update database. Or hopefully on our FLP project. Great. That is also not wanting to work. Oh, and I understand why now. It is because once you do something to change, to like update this functionality, you got to close this down and open up a new one. Oh man, I hope this is not going to... Can we close this down, please? I don't want you to reopen the same one I did. And let's do Package Manager Console. I believe actually we'll have to close down Visual Studio and start it back up. I am going to just keep it rolling here. All right. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Starting up Docker. Make sure we can run the container. Great. Okay. I'm going to go Package Manager Console, and we're going to do update database. Sweet. Update database. Okay, build started. All right. So on the default project, we're going to update the database. So this is so you can see here, some things were applied. So we can say, all right, database command, this is all, none of this, we didn't set any of this. We just said to the program.cs, hey, you have a database set. I need you to create this stuff. And in that default connection, we said, hey, look at the database FLP. So there's no database that exists underneath that connection string. So it just created one for us. So this is powerful when you want to just create your own, let's say in your own development work, like you want to make a database and just test with data. So if you go look in SQL Server Object Explorer, see how we still want this one. We still want the one we just referenced. And if you look, we have FLP. So FLP database exists, our table, we don't have anything, but we have EF migrations history. So now we don't have any migrations. We're going to go over migrations in the next episode and kind of build out some entities for Entity Framework Core. But as of right now, we have gone over quite a bit of information on FLP.data and FLP server. So this is an intro to a little bit of Blazor and also getting data set up for you to use, getting your database kind of framework built out. And we'll go over that more. We did kind of go over DTOs, but that will be more for when we're working with the client, and that will happen in a later episode. So I hope you found this useful. I will have a link to the GitHub and all relevant links listed either in the website or underneath the video. But good luck to you, and hopefully this helped out. And just as a quick note, always check in your changes. Always have your build in a successful state. You can run it. So this is the build time. Always have your build and runtime working before you check any of your code in. Just as a rule of thumb, not only for yourself, but for if you're working on a team, like you don't want to check in your code to like a dev branch or a main branch when it's broken. So you always want to run build and test and make sure your application is actually running the way you expect it to before you do any saves and then commit. And always do like a good message. This one might be a little long, but this is template for web app using entity framework core using and we'll call that a good commit message. Again, we're just doing initial setup, and we'll get better with doing branches, and we'll go into maybe some more pull request and policy making in Azure DevOps at a later date. But make sure that's checked in before anything. You want to always save, always have a backup somewhere. You never have your work just saved locally. Always have it somewhere else. And don't delete your work either. Just always keep building off of your old stuff and improving on it.